This is what the UFC Light Heavyweight division looked like in 2013. This is back when Jon Jones was just running through the division. He had beaten Machida, Shogun, Rampage, Rashad Evans, just destroying the old champions of the division, and was ready to take on some new challengers. Unfortunately, Dan Henderson got injured, and Jon Jones instead fought Vitor Belfort, and then Chael Sonnen stepped in as his next challenger. So that's where we are in the light heavyweight division, February 2013. Let's see how we got from this to where we are now in 2018. Let's go. We start off with Lyoto Machida defeating Dan Henderson in a very close, kind of boring fight. Machida moves up, Gustafsson moves up, Dan Henderson down 2 spots. And then Jon Jones TKOs Chael Sonnen, almost lost the fight due to a broken toe, nothing changes. Glover Teixeira submits James Tahuna, nothing changes. And then Rashad Evans defeats Dan Henderson in a close, boring decision. He moves up to number 4, and Dan Henderson falls off of the top 5. And then Phil Davis kind of beats Machida. I thought he lost, but that catapults him up to number 3. Lyoto Machida down to 4. And then Glover Teixeira KOs Ryan Bader. That doesn't change anything. And then Jon Jones defeats Alexander Gustafsson in a crazy fight. Fight of the year. But that doesn't move anybody since they're champion and number 1 already.
And then Lyoto Machida drops down to middleweight, which takes him off of the UFC Light Heavyweight Rankings. Lil Nog bumps up to number 5.
And then Rashad Evans TKOs Chael Sonnen. That bumps him 1 spot above Phil Davis. Although you'd wonder why, because Chael Sonnen is a middleweight. And so at the end of 2013, this is what the UFC Light Heavyweight Rankings look like. Phil Davis bumped all the way up to number 4. Alexander Gustafsson established himself as Jon Jones' equal, gets him at number 1, and then Chael Sonnen oddly at number 8. Daniel Cormier starts off the year TKOing Patrick Cummins, makes his light heavyweight debut, going from number 2 at heavyweight to number 5 at light heavyweight. And then Alexander Gustafsson KOs Jimmy Manuwa, doesn't change anything. And then Anthony Johnson makes his top 5 debut, getting a decision win over Phil Davis, bumping Davis off the rankings and Johnson to number 5. And then Jon Jones gets a decision victory over Glover Teixeira, bumps Glover down 1 spot. Rashad now number 2. And Daniel Cormier submits Dan Henderson, bumping both Teixeira and Evans down, and Cormier now the number 2 contender at light heavyweight. And then Anthony Johnson KOs Nogueira. That doesn't change anything though. That's not enough to bump you up. But Rashad Evans, he's injured, hasn't fought for a while. He gets bumped down 2 spots to number 5. Teixeira, Rumble Johnson up 1 spot each. And then Phil Davis gets a decision victory over Glover Teixeira, bumping him back onto the top 5 at number 5. Anthony Johnson's now at number 3. And this is what the light heavyweight rankings looked like at the end of 2014. See some new names in the top 5 with Daniel Cormier and Anthony Johnson, Teixeira dropping from the rankings, OSP and Jimmy Manuwa making their rankings debut. And now we are entering probably the funnest year if you're a fan of rankings, if you're a fan of the UFC. This is 2015. Should I spoil it? No. If you don't know the history of 2015 in the light heavyweight division, well, guess what? It's a roller coaster. Get ready. To start off 2015, Jon Jones defeats the number 2 ranked Daniel Cormier in a heated fight. These guys hated each other. And Daniel Cormier loses, so I guess that's the last time we're going to hear about Daniel Cormier and Jon Jones, am I right? Well, Ryan Bader defeats Phil Davis. Davis off of the top 5, Bader making his top 5 debut. And then Anthony Rumble Johnson TKOs Alexander Gustafsson, moves up to the number 1 contender spot. And then Phil Davis, he signs with Bellator. He is now out of the UFC and off the rankings. And then
face felony charges if and when police do find him, and again, he is turning himself in, so he will face felony charges in this case. Now,
yes, the only man that can beat Jon Jones is himself. He gets involved in a hit and run where he did the hitting and the running. He gets arrested, and the UFC strips him of the light heavyweight championship, and because of that, off the rankings. So who's going to be champion now? Cormier defeats Rumble Johnson for the light heavyweight title and is now champion. That bumps up Bader and Teixeira because of Jon Jones' absence. And then Rashad Evans is too inactive, so he bumps down one spot, and Glover Teixeira up to number 4. And then Glover Teixeira submits Ovince St. Preux. That puts him up to number 3, Bader down to number 4. Then Anthony Johnson knocks out Jimmy Manuwa. That doesn't change anything though. Ryan Bader gets a decision win over Rashad Evans. Rashad out of the top 5. Ovince St. Preux is now a top 5 fighter. And then Daniel Cormier gets a close decision win over Alexander Gustafsson. Amazing fight. Doesn't affect the rankings though. And then Jonathan Dwight Jones returns. Hasn't returned to fighting, but he's back in the UFC, so gets back onto the rankings and goes up to number 1, because of course, why wouldn't he? And Glover Teixeira TKO's Patrick Cummins. That doesn't change anything. And this is what the light heavyweight rankings look like at the end of 2015. Boy, did things change. Daniel Cormier now champion. Got Bader at number 4. Ovince St. Preux up to number 6. Rampage Jackson at number 10. He's now in the UFC again. Some weird times in the UFC. Let's see if 2016 is any less chaotic. I wonder if it will be. We're halfway through this video, so I just wanted to remind people to like the video because that does a lot for these videos. It sends it on people's homepage who might also like this type of content. So please like this video if you haven't already, and subscribe to MMA Nation. We put out a bunch of quality videos about everything in the UFC, and it'll notify you the next time I do one of these videos. So if you could do that right now before we move on, that would be great. Okay, let's move on. We're going to start off with some screwiness right off the bat. Rampage Jackson is removed from the rankings due to legal troubles between him, Bellator, and the UFC contract stuff, so he's now gone. Anthony Johnson then knocked out Ryan Bader. Bader moves down 1 spot, Glover Teixeira up 1 spot, and Anthony Johnson stays put at number 2. And then Ovince St. Preux KOs Patrick Cummins. Cummins off the top 10. Lil Nog back onto the top 10. And then Glover Teixeira knocks out Rashad Evans. That bumps him 1 spot up above Alexander Gustafsson. Jon Jones defeats Ovince St. Preux in his return fight. Jon Jones is back, number 1 contender, interim title, facing Daniel Cormier for the light heavyweight championship of the world, and instead he loses to USADA. He gets caught right before his fight with Daniel Cormier at UFC 200. He's off of the card, but not yet off of the rankings. Due process will allow him to contest things, but for now, he's no longer fighting Daniel Cormier. Instead, Daniel Cormier is fighting Anderson Silva, who he beats, and remains the champion, even though it wasn't a championship fight. Nothing changes in the rankings, though. Silva doesn't get added to the light heavyweight division. Mauricio Shogun Rua defeats Lil Nog. That bumps him up 1 spot to number 7, and Rashad Evans continues his trend downwards to number 8. And then Jon Jones is finally removed. Yes, they found that he was using illegal substances, tested the B sample. He's off of the rankings. And Krylov gets in at number 10 because of it. Anthony Johnson, now number 1 contender. And then Johnson KOs Teixeira, solidifying his number 1 spot. Teixeira down 1 spot to number 3. And then Ryan Bader knocked out Ilir Latifi. That doesn't change anything, but it was a hell of a knockout. And then Alexander Gustafsson defeated Blachowicz. Doesn't change anything. Jimmy Manuwa, though, knocks out Ovince St. Preux, bumping him all the way up to number 5. Manuwa, welcome to the top 5 of the light heavyweight division. And then Rashad Evans, not having much success at light heavyweight, drops down to middleweight. That puts Corey Anderson up to number 9. Oh, and Ryan Bader, same time, knocked out Lil Nog down to 10. And then Misha Serkinov submits Nikita Krylov. He debuts in the rankings at number 8 at light heavyweight. And this is what the light heavyweight division looks like at the end of a crazy 2017. Jon Jones came back. Jon Jones then left. Daniel Cormier remains as champion. And you have a new face in Jimmy Manuwa in the top 5 of the rankings. Also guys like Misha Serkinov, Corey Anderson, and Krylov rounding out the top 10. Looks like a pretty good division though, although Jon Jones' absence. Maybe he'll come back though. Maybe he will be back in 2017. I guess we'll see. And we're gonna run through 2017 right now quickly because a lot happened. Let's go. Right off the bat, Serkinov's a free agent, removed from the rankings. Latifi in at number 10. And then Ozdemir defeats St. Preux, gets himself into the top 10 rankings, although not ahead of OSP. And then Glover Teixeira defeats Cannonier, nothing happens. Krylov is then released by the UFC, Latifi back onto the top 10. Then a random shuffle puts Ozdemir in his correct position and Manawa at number 4. Then Ryan Bader gets dropped by the UFC, he goes to Bellator. Lil Nog back on to the top 10. And then Jimmy Manawa beats Corey Anderson and Serkinov re-signs with the UFC. That shuffles everything in the bottom 6 to 10 of the rankings. And then Shogun TKOs Jean Vellante, nothing changes. And Daniel Cormier submits Anthony Johnson, nothing changes though. But then Johnson retires after getting submitted. Everybody gets bumped up other than OSP, and Lil Nog back onto the top 10. Alexander Gustafsson defeats Glover Teixeira. Teixeira down 1 spot, Manawa to number 2. And then Volkan Ozdemir defeats Serkinov, gets the number 4 spot. But then Ozdemir after that defeats Jimmy Manawa all the way up to number 2 for Ozdemir. But then John Jones returns. But wait. John Jones defeats Daniel Cormier.
Then John Jones failed a pre-fight UFC 214 drug test and competition.
USADA caught Jones again. Too bad. Ovince St. Preux defeats Corey Anderson, up to number 5 now. And at the end of 2017, woo! This is what the UFC Light Heavyweight division looks like. John Jones got all the way up to the championship position, but then you USADA'd yourself again, John Jones. Out of the rankings, Serkinov to number 7. Patrick Cummins in the top 10 now. We have a newcomer to the top 5 of the division, Volkan Ozdemir, running the gauntlet at light heavyweight up to number 2. Ozdemir was pretty much the heartwarming story of 2017, from nothing to number 2. Let's see how he did in 2018. We're going to slow things down because a lot happened in 2018, and it's all recent stuff, so we'll see how the division has changed this year. Right off the bat, Daniel Cormier did his work against Volkan Ozdemir, TKOing him. Ozdemir down to number 3, ending his streak at light heavyweight. Teixeira back up to number 2. And then Ilir Latifi submits Ovince St. Preux. Latifi now a top 5 light heavyweight. Yes, the greatest of all time at number 5. And then Jan Blachowicz defeats Jimmy Manawa. That shoots him all the way up to number 5. Damn, 2 new guys in the top 5.
Corey Anderson defeats Patrick Cummins, bumping him up to the number 9 spot, and Misha Serkinov now down to 10th. And then Ovince St. Preux defeats Tyson Pedro, bumping him 1 spot up ahead of Shogun.
And then the most significant fight from a light heavyweight fighter happens at heavyweight. Daniel Cormier knocks out Stipe Miocic, becomes champion of the heavyweight division. No, that doesn't change the light heavyweight rankings in any way, but that's just beautiful. Daniel Cormier, now heavyweight champion. And now the most recent light heavyweight fights, Anthony Smith knocks out Shogun. That removes Shogun from the UFC light heavyweight rankings and puts Smith all the way up to number 8. But Corey Anderson did not want to be outdone because on the same night, he gets a decision victory over Glover Teixeira. Teixeira drops all the way down to number 8. Corey Anderson moves up to number 6, and Jimmy Manawa is now back in the top 5. So even though we're only halfway through 2018, this is what the light heavyweight division looks like. It looks a lot different from the beginning of 2018. You have Gustafsson, Ozdemir, Latifi, Blachowicz, and Manawa as your top 5. A lot of European fighters. Corey Anderson at number 6, Glover Teixeira all the way down to number 8, and Anthony Smith making his light heavyweight rankings debut. So we went from John Jones being the man at light heavyweight, having some old champions within the rankings, as well as Gustafsson, Cormier, Rumble, smattering in there within the first couple of years, to Daniel Cormier being the king at light heavyweight with a bunch of newer European fighters as his next task. But will he even take on anybody at light heavyweight? Will he vacate the title, and will one of these people in the top 10 become your light heavyweight champion by maybe 2019? I guess we'll see. Light heavyweight was definitely the most chaotic division, just with John Jones causing a mess, with fighters signing with other organizations or retiring after title shots. This is definitely a chaotic division, an entertaining division. But yes, very chaotic, which is why I love doing this rankings video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this trip down memory lane. Hopefully it reminded you of a cool fight that you need to go watch now. If you liked what you saw, make sure to subscribe. That'll notify you on getting these videos in your subscription feed, and comment down below, what division do you want me to do next? I've done lightweight, welterweight, heavyweight, and now light heavyweight. So you have a couple of options. Please go tell me down below, and watch the old videos if you haven't. They're just as good as this one. And make sure to like this video because that helps out. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in a week or two with a new rankings video. All right.